Hello, third grade. This is part 6 of the Sisters Grimm. Chapter 5. Granny swung her handbag at the frog girl and cracked her on the forehead. The monster groaned and fell to the ground. Sabrina had seen what sort of stuff the old woman kept in her purse. Everything from spy goggles to rolls of quarter, so she knew it packed quite a wallop. It would take the frog girl a while to get up, if she got up at all. Not wasting any time, the Grimm women spun in the opposite direction and raced down the stairs. Elvis followed close behind, clumsily navigating the steep steps and barking threateningly. "If we're lucky," Granny said through winded breath, "that thing will be too afraid of Elvis to come after us." "And if we aren't?" Sabrina asked as she helped her grandmother down the last of the steps. Unfortunately, the old woman didn't get a chance to respond. The frog girl bounced down the steps onto a nearby wall, sticking like a suction cup. Elvis stood his ground, baring his teeth at the monster, daring her to come closer. "Your puppy isn't very nice," the frog girl croaked, "but he'll digest in my belly as quickly as the three of you." Delphine stepped forward and flashed her shiny new deputy badge. "You're under arrest for being gross," she stammered, but the frog girl was not impressed. She lunged for the little girl. Sabrina grabbed her sister's hand and dragged her down the hallway towards the exit. The monster followed by leaping back and forth from wall to wall, gaining ground with each jump. By the time the Grimms reached the exit, the frog girl was right behind them. She shot her thick tongue out and wrapped it around Delphine's arm, dragging the little girl back into her clutches. Elvis leapt viciously at the creature, but it jumped to the ceiling and hung upside down out of his reach. "Let her go," Sabrina shouted as she desperately reached for her sister. The frog girl let out a sickening giggle and continued to dangle Delphine right above Sabrina's grasp. The little girl struggled and finally reached into her beehive hairdo, yanked a protractor from her sticky locks, and stabbed the frog's tongue with it. The monster shrieked, and Delphine fell, knocking Sabrina to the ground. "Oh, you didn't like my hairdo?" Delphine said to her sister, as she quickly helped her to her feet, and the two ran to the exit doors with Granny and Elvis close behind. "Start the car!" Sabrina shouted as they sprinted across the school lawn. Mr. Canis opened his eyes and, without pausing, climbed off the roof of the car. Within seconds, the old jalopy roared to life, grinding metal on metal and shaking violently. The Junkers' obnoxious concert had never sounded so good to Sabrina. "What happened?" Mr. Canis asked as Elvis, Granny, and the girls clambered into the car, but no one got to answer. Something slammed onto the roof. It was so loud they all jumped, except Mr. Canis, whose only reaction was to look up and raise a questioning eyebrow. Just then, a slimy green hand smacked the driver's side window. Sabrina and Delphine screamed. Granny whooped in astonishment, and Elvis growled and bared his teeth. But Mr. Canis just took a deep breath, put the car into drive, and floored the gas. The car's tires squealed, and the jalopy rocketed onto the street, skidding across the country road before some quick steering set it on the right course. "Oh, I do wish I could drive," Granny said. "I used to love situations like this." "You know very well the police took your license away," Mr. Canis said, steering from one side of the road to the other, in hopes of dislodging their stowaway. Unfortunately, nothing the old man did had any effect on the monster, and it continued to beat violently on the roof. "I got a couple speeding tickets," Granny shrugged. "You were arrested 14 times for reckless endangerment. Several neighborhoods banned you from driving on their streets. The German government said that if they ever caught you in a car in Berlin again, you would be hanged," the old man corrected. "Oh, Mr. Canis," Granny begged. "No one has to know. Besides, this isn't getting us anywhere." He shook his head. Please? Mr. Canis slammed his foot on the brake, and the car screeched to a halt. The frog girl tumbled down the hood and bounced along the road for several yards until she stopped. She let out a terrible moan and then just lay there. Let's stay off the major roads, the old man said, opening his door and getting out. Granny squealed with delight and scooted over in the driver's seat. As they switched places, Sabrina watched the grotesque frog girl stir, slowly get to her feet, and stare at the car. Even with her bizarre, twisted face, the murderous rage in her eyes was clear. Children, Mr. Canis said as he turned to face the sisters, put your seatbelts on. The girls eyed each other nervously and hurried to strap themselves in. Unfortunately, the ancient seatbelts that had been installed in the car were torn. So Mr. Canis had used ropes to improvise. Sabrina helped Delphine tie hers into a knot around her waist and then went to work on her own. Just as their ropes were secure, the monster leapt into the air and came down violently on the car's front end. The impact was great. The car's back end lifted a full 6 feet off the ground, then came down violently. The monster leaned forward to get a better look through the windshield, and then licked her lips. Going somewhere, she laughed. Elvis whined and crawled under his blanket as Granny floored the accelerator and the car lunged forward. The monster tumbled over the hood, up the windshield, over the roof, onto the trunk, and fell off the back end of the car. She's gone, Sabrina cried just before the freak hopped back onto the trunk. It laughed at them through the rear window. She's back, Delphine said, diving under the blanket with Elvis. Granny made a sharp left onto an old dirt road and pressed hard on the gas pedal. The ancient car screamed in protest, but held up its end with a burst of speed so powerful Sabrina felt the G-forces pushing her into the seat spring. Despite the incredible speed, the frog girl held on with little effort and pounded angrily on the rear window. The massive blows caused a thick crack in the glass. Turning right, Granny shouted from the driver's seat just before she made the turn. Elvis tumbled over the girls as the car banked to the right. But the maneuver didn't seem to shake the monster. Turning left, Granny shouted, and Elvis tumbled to the other side of the car, landing heavily on Sabrina's belly and knocking the wind out of her. The frog girl smacked the window again, and this time it exploded, sending chunks of glass into the back seat. Several large portions of the window stayed attached, but the monster pulled them off effortlessly and tossed them in the road. Sabrina pushed Elvis off her and fought to empty her burning lungs. As she struggled, the frog girl reached in the back seat with her sticky fingers, unfastened Delphine's rope belt, and snatched the little girl right out of her seat. Still choking and gasping for air, Sabrina grabbed desperately at Delphine's ankle and tried to pull her back in the car, but the frog girl's grip was too strong. "She's got Delphine," she gasped, but Mr. Canis had already sprung into action. He rolled down the window and pulled his upper body out of the car. "There's no need to hurry, old man. You'll die soon enough," the frog girl screamed. A ferocious roar echoed back at the monster, and Sabrina could see her eyes grow wide with surprise. "You're one of us?" the frog girl cried. "And you fight for the life of the filthy Grimm? You're a traitor. I should have known you by your stink." "Put the child back in the car," Sabrina heard Mr. Canis demand, even over the roaring engine. "The traitor gets no favors," the frog girl laughed. She reached into the back seat with a free arm and grabbed Sabrina. Sabrina squirmed and slapped at the disgusting hand, but it still managed to snatch her sweater and drag her out the window. "I'm not going to tell you again, beast," Mr. Canis threatened. "I've heard stories about you, traitor," the monster croaked. "The big bad wolf, trying to make amends for all the bad things he'd done. You'll fail, old-timer. Your heart isn't in it, but no matter, I'll give you the dignity of knowing you died trying." Mr. Canis was too far away to do anything. Sabrina knew if she and her sister were going to survive, they were going to have to save themselves. "Delphine, do you remember Mr. Oberlin?" Sabrina shouted, hoping her sister had not forgotten that particular foster father. "From the Bronx?" the little girl asked. Sabrina nodded. A disgusted look flashed across her sister's face, told Sabrina her plan wasn't the little girl's favorite. Regardless, Delphine nodded, and together the sisters leaned down and bit the frog girl hard. The monster shrieked in agony and let go of Delphine. Sabrina grabbed her sister, and together they scrambled back into the car. The frog girl huddled on the trunk, clutching her wounds. "What happened?" Granny said, still pushing hard on the gas. "It appears I'm not the only one in our home with fangs," Mr. Canis said, climbing back in the car. "You've got to get rid of this thing," Sabrina shouted as she wiped the horrible taste out of her mouth with her shirt sleeve. A bit of goo was on her chin, and her shirt stuck to it like it was powerful glue. Delphine was also busy rubbing the monster's taste off her tongue with her sleeve. Again, the frog girl reached in through the window, but Elvis snapped at the hand and the monster pulled back. "Don't worry," Granny said as she made a rough turn onto the gravel road. "I have a plan." Sabrina looked through the windshield and saw a sign blocking the road ahead. It read, "Danger, bridge unsafe, go no farther." Worse was what was beyond it. In the distance was an old, run-down country bridge covering a rocky stream. One look at it told Sabrina that a mouse wouldn't be able to cross the bridge safely, let alone Granny's ancient 2-ton monstrosity on wheels. "What's Granny's plan?" Delphine said, smacking at the frog's monster's hand as it snatched at her through the window. "You don't want to know," said Sabrina. The car crashed through the old wooden sign and exploded around them. A large chunk landed on the roof, and by the sounds of the pained groan, smacked the monster in the head. The collision was enough to knock Frog Girl off the car, and she trembled painfully onto the road. Unfortunately, Granny didn't stop driving, and when the jalopy raced onto the beginning of the rickety bridge, Sabrina knew they were in trouble. Creaking beams and snapping wood drowned out the car's backfires and grinding gear. The old bridge tilted to the left just as the car reached the halfway point. She saw a sight that nearly gave her a heart attack. The middle of the bridge had collapsed, leaving a giant hole no car could get across, and Granny wasn't even slowing down. "Granny, we're not going to make it," Sabrina shouted, battling the roaring engine to be heard. "I love pancakes too," the old woman shouted back. "I hate this car," Sabrina thought to herself. Granny floored the accelerator and the car screamed. A flame shot out of the car's muffler, and suddenly they were soaring over the gaping hole. They landed hard on the other side and raced onto the road just as the bridge buckled and collapsed into the rocky stream below. After several yards, Granny brought the car to a stop. She shut off the engine. "That took care of the ugly little beast," Granny laughed as she turned around to face the girl. "How exciting was that?" "Were you excited? I'm having the time of my life." Everyone remained speechless, except for Elvis, who whined softly. Granny didn't notice. She continued to jabber on like a little kid who'd had too much sugar before bedtime. "Oh boy, did Froggy get the surprise of her life," she continued, smacking the steering wheel proudly. "You put Rhoda Grimm behind the wheel, and things get done." The old woman turned back around and prepared to start the car, but everyone shouted "no" in unison. Mr. Canis snatched the keys out of the ignition. Delphine saw the disappointment in her grandmother's face. The old woman slowly got out of the car, and Mr. Canis slid over into the driver's seat. As she got into the passenger side, Granny crossed her arms and pouted. It reminded Sabrina of something Delphine would do. "My driving isn't that bad, is it?" the old woman asked. "Yes," everyone shouted. Once the house was unlocked, the family staggered inside, with Sabrina quietly cursing one of the worst days of her life. Puck was sprawled across the couch. He had moved the books away from the television and was watching it with the sound all the way up. The boy was surrounded by 3 delivery pizza boxes, empty bags of chips, a leaky carton of ice cream, and a 2-liter bottle of soda from which he was currently drinking. On his belly was a can of spray cheese, and when he saw the family limp into the house, he put down the soda and lifted the cheese can, spraying an enormous portion into his mouth. Then he gargled with it. Once he had swallowed the greasy orange junk food, he let out an enormous belch that actually rattled the windows. "Old lady," he crowed, "you've been hiding this magic box from me. You can see other worlds in it. I just watched a man and his talking sports car jump across a river." Sabrina felt her exhaustion turn instantly to anger. From their expressions, she could see the rest of the family felt the same way. While they had been hunted by a frog monster, Puck had had the best day of his life. Fate was cruel. "What?" he said defensively, noticing their glares. Granny started dinner and patiently explained to Puck what had happened to them. The boy seemed to think Mr. Grupner's murder was fascinating and was terribly depressed that he hadn't seen the frog girl. "Was she ugly?" he asked. "Why is it that I miss all the fun?" "I guess you don't have our luck," Sabrina grumbled. "I hope the 2 of you washed," he said to the girls. Frogs give you warts, and it sounds like the one you fought off was a mighty big one. I wouldn't be surprised if you wake up in the morning and find out you're one giant brown wart." Delphine's eyes grew as big as saucers. "Nuh-uh," she said. "Sorry, kiddo, but if you hurry and take a bath, it might not be too late," Puck advised. The little girl rushed out of the kitchen and could be heard running through the house and up to the bathroom. "You shouldn't tease her like that," Sabrina said, viciously washing her hands in the kitchen sink. "Puck, do you know the widow?" Granny asked as she got up to stir a pot of soup on the stove. "Of course," Puck replied, "Queen of the Crows." "Go get her," Rhoda said. "Why? Are you going to cook her?" "Of course not," Granny said, horrified. "I have some questions for her." "Since when does Trickster King act as your messenger, old lady?" he said. "Since he started living under this roof," Mr. Canis growled. He slammed his fist hard on the kitchen counter, causing the sugar bowl to lose its lid. "This is serious business, boy. Now go." Puck eyed Canis stubbornly. "Villains do not run errands."